Hi, I'm Anthony Ha, a senior writer with TechCrunch. And for this session, I'm really excited to be talking to Angela Benton, the CEO of Streamlytics. And the topic is ethical data collection. What does that mean? Is that even, what distinguishes that from other kinds of data collection? Obviously, that's a big topic nowadays. So, Angela, why don't we start with just the really high level question of what is ethical data collection? What makes it different from previous data collection practices?
Sure. So what's funny when you talk about data, I always use my kids as an example because I think it is a really good example of the importance of data where like my 14-year-old is like, I know I have data, like I should have access to my own data. And it's so different, I think, from where we first started, which, a lot of, folks like you and I, Anthony, we've been in the industry for quite some time. And so we're used to the policies kind of being what they were since the inception of the internet. And what that really means is like when you sign up for free services, they're basically using, your data, and how they're doing it has been like this really like opaque thing, you know what I mean? Where, whether it's cookie tracking, whether it's the user level account data that's ended up being resold to third parties. So there's like this industry of alternative data or data brokerages where all of your data is just basically being bought and sold. It's happening at a very high level, think billions of dollars. And so when you think of ethical data collection, what that really does is it puts you as the consumer, the data creator, into that ecosystem where you should also benefit from that as well, whether that's from an agency perspective and opting out and saying, I do not want you to sell my data, or whether that's a mechanism where you can choose to monetize your own data. It's kind of an ecosystem of services, I think, that are popping up that really allow the consumer to participate in this as well.
Mhm. And so, well, maybe to get more specific, why don't you tell me a little bit more about how Streamlytics enables that kind of data sharing?
Sure. So, what I'm doing at Streamlytics is I like to use the term ecosystem because a lot of times people use the term marketplace, and we're not
Mm.
really a data marketplace. We're not really a marketplace to monetize personal data. We are an ecosystem of products that essentially enable everyday consumers to actually upload or connect their data from a data source. So think, your Netflix data, your Google data, your Apple data. And what we do from there is we have a proprietary algorithm that actually values the data, which is it's a small part, but it's a big part of the broader discussion around what is the value of an individual's data, right? Right now, there's a lot of services that, you'll get paid $1 or two. And so our
Hmm.
thesis, particularly around the algorithm, is that your data is not worth $1 or two, especially if, these companies are $1 trillion companies. And so our algorithm looks at a couple of different things: the data source, not only that, the volume of data that you're uploading, but then also from the data source perspective, if this is a publicly traded company, we're actually looking at things like market capitalization as well to determine the value of the company that's being built off your data and what your data is actually worth. And so we value the data, and then from there it gets enhanced and cleaned, and we produce what's called a data stream. And so our customers on the other side, these are companies that are really at the cutting edge. They're innovative. They know that, this era of the cookie and web tracking is dying, and they want to be at the forefront of that from a marketing perspective. But honestly, it's even more than that. It's from a business intelligence perspective. So, I was actually shocked to learn when I started Streamlytics that a lot of this data wasn't readily available, just because coming from technology, like we make data driven decisions every day. It's just kind of what we do as second nature. And so the rest of the world is going this way. as well. And they want data that's more accurate, that's ethical, that also kind of gives a better view of what's actually happening. A lot of the data products that exist right now, it's kind of an old way of doing things, meaning it's based on a panel, it's based on like one data source, like what you're watching on TV, for example. And that's not how we live. And so how we live now is I'm streaming something or binging something on Netflix. I'm ordering from Uber at the same time. And honestly, I might be browsing from Amazon as well. You know what I mean? And so what we're doing is we are looking at a user's accounts from various different perspectives, and we're unifying that into one data stream. We're removing the personal identifying information, and then that global data stream is being sold to a customer.
Right. So, can you generalize it all in terms of if I'm an average South by Southwest attendee, probably reasonably tech savvy and active, how much is my data worth?
What's interesting about our consumer facing application culture, which focuses on the African American community, is we have super users just like any other consumer facing application. So we have people that are on there legitimately like spending a lot of time uploading and connecting data, and are making upwards of $1,000. And then we have other people where it's kind of a passive thing, and it's like $10 or $15, or $1 if they do like one Netflix file versus like uploading the whole archive that Google gives you, or that Amazon gives you, or that Apple gives you.
You also mentioned that one of the sort of main consumer groups or demographic groups that you're directing this towards are African Americans. Why did you feel like that was the right audience for this?
Yeah. So Anthony, I've known you for quite some time. I think it's like I've known you, this is my third business. I've known you like for like every phase of my entrepreneurial career. But my first business with Black Web 2.0, honestly, it was like a tech crunch for African Americans. And so all I did was cover and focus on what African Americans were doing from a technology perspective at an entrepreneurship level, but just from a community perspective as well as it applied to technology. And so as a result, we would get reports, we would read, Pew Internet studies. And so for the past decade, African Americans have over-indexed in media consumption. So that's kind of full stop. Like that's something that we know. But then in our, culture, particularly the internet culture, when you're looking at pop culture, African Americans are driving a lot of activity. When Bird Box is getting a lot of viewership on Netflix, it's because the memes that the Black community is generating on social media. You know what I mean? So for me, it was it made sense at a data level to kind of focus on this community. But more than that, it made sense to really try to redistribute some of the wealth that's being created from a lot of these activities directly back into the community. And I think that's what we can do by leveraging, individuals' data.
Mm-hmm. A big part of it is also that they believe that the data you're providing is uniquely valuable.
Absolutely. And so, we still, in our sales process, we still have some companies that we run across that are old school, I guess I'll say. And they're like, why are you focusing on African Americans? And they kind of want more of a general market solution. And for me, it just doesn't make sense. Even when you look at like the global population growth, like the World Bank, the IMF, they put out a study that said the Black diaspora between now and 2050, that is where the global population growth is coming from. So I like to say we're focused on, growing markets, and the African American community, or I should say the Black community specifically, the diaspora is
Mm-hmm.
a growing market. But a large majority of the people who want to work with Streamlytics get it, honestly. And so these are companies that are used to being first movers in a new space. They're usually innovators within, a large enterprise, and they're excited and interested and understand like the value that this community has in the larger ecosystem.
The community that's participating and sharing their data is important to you. Is it also important to you to sort of work with the right partners in the sense that given that you're collecting data, even though without personally identifiable information, but you want to find partners who are going to use the data in ways that you're comfortable with?
Yeah, absolutely. And so this, a good example actually is artificial intelligence and machine learning. And so what I'm really excited about, I think a lot of times when I'm talking to people about what we're doing with Streamlytics, they kind of think ad tech, and that's not really what it is. Just because data is at the core of everything that we do as a society right now. And so, what gets me most excited is the application for machine learning. And so when you are looking at things like, facial recognition that misidentifies, Black people or people of darker skin, and that's largely because the training algorithms aren't training on a diverse data set. Or when you look at, things like people getting declined for, loan applications, it's a long time ago. I remember when I got my first car loan, like I went into the bank, I filled out stuff on paper, I talked to a loan officer. That's not happening anymore. People are filling out stuff, and it's an algorithm that at least at bare minimum does that first level of screening. And so now we need to start to think about and ask the question is, well, what data was this algorithm trained on, right? And a good example was like when Apple came out with their Apple credit card, and it was a woman in a household that applied, she got declined. Her husband applied with the same information, he got approved.
Mm. And do you have a sense that how confident are you that, especially the sort of big players in this space really want to make a conscious effort to change some of and address some of these issues?
Yeah. Well, we have one partner whom I can't name, but is top, you know, 5 technology company, who is doing a lot of interesting stuff and is super committed to this, which is different than what you would typically think. Now, I definitely think that there's a place for other companies. I love to see what Apple is doing, taking a privacy, first approach to things. And so I think a lot of other technology companies are going to adopt this. And I think they're going to adopt it the more pissed off everyday people are, to be honest. Like, people are really waking up to how their data is being used, and they don't like it. It's almost a personal violation in a sense.
That's interesting because I had a later question that I was going to ask about to what extent should people be worried, but it sounds like to a certain extent the phrase that you used far more memorably was pissed off. So what is it that you think people should be pissed off about?
Yeah, I think people should be pissed off that, when we started building these applications on the internet, the user experience was a little bit of text that you may or may not click on that's hyperlinked. But in order to get to the other side, you simply check the box and you go through, right? And no one's reading the terms of services at all. You don't really know what you're opting into. And so big tech is like, well, we can use your data. You opted in. This is what you're signing up for. And that's true. People are opting in, but the usability of it, people don't realize what they're opting in to. And so now I think people are understanding what they're opting into, and they're like, they're putting the pieces of the puzzle together. They're like, wait a minute, I'm using said service, and this company is $1 billion company. And by the way, they make money from selling my data. They feel like that they should get a piece of it, or again, at bare minimum, that they should be able to say, yes, you can use my data, or no, you cannot use my data, especially from a perspective of, these phones that we're walking around with every day that, we're attached to the hip at. It's one thing to sign up for a service and understand the user data that you're actively submitting. It's another thing for the data that's being passively collected, like location data, and down to the coordinates. You know what I mean? That's completely different.
Yeah. So, what are the ways in which both Streamlytics, but potentially any other company interested in this space can take what's fairly arcane and challenging and make it accessible to a broad audience?
Yeah. So one of the things that we are doing on the consumer side is when someone signs up to use Culture, what they're also doing is they're getting a data license that says, hey, we're licensing the data from you. We don't own this data. Yes, we're going to monetize it. Yes, this is how much we want to pay you for it, but this is your data. And there are a handful of companies that are doing this, but it's something that is increasingly becoming more popular. One notable company that also does this that I was actually I was surprised to hear, but then also excited to hear was Microsoft. Microsoft actually provides a data license. They have a data monetization app called Trove that they basically allow people, everyday people, to upload images for image recognition training for a lot of their AI and object image recognition. And so a part of what they do, they also create a data license. And so I think we're used to thinking about terms of services, privacy policies. I think a data license is a very powerful tool that, okay, if we know the user behavior is you're not necessarily going to read terms of service, right? So we don't necessarily, it's very hard to change user behavior. If people have been clicking that button and moving on to the next phase for decades at this point. And so if we know that's the user behavior, there's an opportunity to amplify the data license and kind of put it in your face almost at an interstitial level and say, hey, before you go to the next step, this is the data license. For us, people also, they have to sign the data license. There's a signature on file that they sign the data license, that they're acknowledging like, yes, this is my data. I can do with it what I want. If I choose to delete it all, I can do that. If I no longer want to use the service, I can delete my account. These are all things that I think people are starting to do, particularly with California Consumer Protection Act. We're now seeing big delete my data buttons and in most of our favorite applications, delete, my account buttons.
Yeah. And I mean, so to what extent do you think these changes are being driven by, companies wanting, consumers becoming more aware, companies wanting to sort of make, talk to those consumers and make them feel like they're not these terrifying or exploitive like surveillance companies. And to what extent is it also just like legally they have to make some of these changes with like regulation, like you mentioned CCPA in California and GDPR in Europe?
Honestly, I think it's a blend of all three things. You're going to have some companies that genuinely want to be ethical, you know what I mean, and want to change, some of their policies. You, of course, are going to have some bad actors that are like, we've made billions of dollars so far. We like the way it's going. We don't want to change. You know what I mean? So you're going to have some folks that um, you know that part resonates with them, but you're also going to have some people who are really scared about the PR ramifications. I think particularly around tech. The halo of like tech is kind of fading, you know what I mean?
Mhm. And I mean, if I understand the Streamlytics model correctly, and you said that you don't think of it as a marketplace, but as an ecosystem, but it still seems like it's built around the outcome of financial compensation for your data. If I'm somebody who just listens to this conversation and is just like, I hate all of this, I don't want to be involved in this kind of data collection, I want to be completely private. To what extent, and this is not so much Streamlytics specific, but to what extent are there options out there for them now where you can remove your digital footprint? I mean, is that sort of an impossible dream at this point?
Yeah, I don't think it's an impossible dream, and there are a lot of companies that are actually working on this. I particularly feel like there's companies within kind of this new market that's being created that's like community driven data where they're legitimately focusing on individuals need to want to have agency over their data. Take the monetization piece apart. Maybe they just are like, I want to be private, you know? I mean, there was a time where I wasn't Angela Benton online. I was an alias, you know what I mean, online. And like, I miss that sometimes. Just say what you want, you know? But yeah, a lot of people really want that back. And so there are companies who are making it easy, you know, to be anonymous. One of the issues though that I do see with that is really how the data is structured on all of these different websites. And so, for instance, if you've never, for anyone that's watching this, if you've never done a data request at what I call a multi-service company, so that's a company like Amazon, Facebook, Google that control multiple different services. I definitely encourage you to do that. And once you get your data file back, it's usually, you know, an archive, you unzip it, you can see, number one, the level of detail, which is important, but how unstructured and how unorganized the data is, where you as an individual consumer, you can't really actually do anything with it. Not even talking about from a monetization perspective. I'm even talking about, let's say there was an entrepreneur who wanted to start, you know, a business that allowed people to easily opt out of multiple platforms. If you're looking at it from a data perspective, the way the data is structured is completely, it's actually kind of, it's very, very messy. It's very, very hard to use. So one of the things that we are doing with Streamlytics, and I think when I started telling people about what I was doing, they're like, okay, data monetization, like, well, but it's actually, we had to do a lot of really technical stuff. You know, I told you about the algorithm, but one of the things that we had to do on the back end was we actually created a data standard called the Universal Data Interchange Format. And the good way to think about it is like when Microsoft came out with .docs or Adobe came out with .pdf, where there was a new file that organized information. And so it's we kind of had to do it because in order for us to even be able to like resell data at all, we had to structure it and we had to organize it. And so I do think that there is a future where you want to board a plane to Miami or to Barcelona, and before you board the plane, you're going to need to be able to show and provide your COVID status or whatever personal information that may or may not be on your phone or, you know, an independent app, but your personal data needs to be structured in a unified file. And so that's really the core of what Streamlytics is built on top of.
Right. And so as you try to create the standard that presumably you are hoping more and more companies adopt as well. I mean, where are you in that process? Who are some of the partners that you're trying to work with on this?
Yeah. So I'm smiling because I'm getting so old, but it's like I just feel like the old internet and like open source kind of fell by the wayside, but we're actually doing it as an open source project. And so folks that are interested can go to udif.org. We've talked to some municipalities. We were actually talking to the city of Newark when COVID started. They were interested in trying to find a citizen friendly way to control data to share COVID statuses versus, you know, on the phone. And so people are interested in utilizing it. All we really want to do is provide, you know, a framework for it. But I think it's a very interesting concept that can be extremely powerful in this new way of how individuals are transacting, particularly just around their data. And when I say transact, I don't mean it from a monetization standpoint. It just might be, you might want to share a very small snippet of your data with someone for whatever purpose. And there needs to be a mechanism that allows that.
Do you expect that, say, in the next 4 years under a Biden administration, perhaps, will we be seeing more regulation, or do we feel like the sort of the lay of the land is kind of set now?
Yeah. Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed mainly because it's kind of scary to understand that the United States is the largest Western country that doesn't have a federal data privacy law. Like, we are leaders in so many aspects, and so for us to not be leaders there is disheartening. But we do have a new administration. There are a lot of bills that are bipartisan, you know, both on the left and the right, where people are understanding like how important data privacy is. For sure, now everything that's happened with, you know, Robinhood and kind of like the decentralization of finance, but then also people understanding that, you know, as traders, their data was being was being used on there for like, you know, order flow. So I think people are, the more real world impact that this is having on everyday people, I think communities, citizens will start to demand from their lawmakers that we do have to have a federal data privacy law. One of the things that, you know, I was doing online earlier in 2020 is, you know, I started a petition. I got 15,000 signatures. I sent letters to every single member of Congress, including the Congressional Black Caucus, around the importance of data privacy, particularly as it was relating to COVID statuses. So I think, honestly, I kind of did it. It was a very intuitive thing. I was super surprised to get 15,000 signatures. But I mean, that's a lot. I mean, I have somewhat of a following on social media, but it's not like I have like a million followers, you know what I mean? So I think people are becoming very aware just of like the importance, and we as citizens, we need to hold people accountable, and that means citizens, but that also means people like me who also are in, you know, the technology industry, that we know how important it is. That means, you know, I don't think I have the luxury of like just trying to create a unicorn company. That's not what this is about. This is about trying to create a better society for everyone to live in. And that means that, yeah, I need to take time out, and I need to also be meeting with lawmakers as well.
Right. Well, before we go, if people want to learn more about Streamlytics, or if they want to learn more about the Culture app, where should they go?
If you want to learn more about Streamlytics, you can go to our website, streamlytics.co, and we are at Streamlytics on all social media platforms. If you're interested in culture, you can go to culture, CLTURE, I know it's spelled crazy, .io, or at culture, spelled the same way, on social media platforms.